What's up, Mech fans, and welcome back to the channel. So today we're going to be talking about the first ever Macross game to be released here in the West, and that is Macross Shooting Insight, which released just over a week ago on PlayStation 5 and PlayStation 4, and I think a couple more platforms as well. I've put roughly 15 hours into it, so today we're going to be talking about whether or not it is worth getting. But before we get into that, please do leave a like on this video and subscribe if you're a fan of Mecha anime content and want to see plenty more videos like this in the future. Also, head on down to the comments section below. If you've already picked up this game, let me know what you think of it down there in the comments. Now, before we dive into the positives and negatives surrounding this game, there's one simple question that you must ask yourself before even thinking and contemplating buying this game. And that is, do I enjoy the multi-dimension shooter genre within video games? And if the answer to that is no, don't even bother picking this game up, because it doesn't break the mold of that. So if you simply do not enjoy this style of game in the first place, well, you're not going to enjoy this one. Now, for those that don't know what the multi-dimension shooter genre is, which I don't even know whether that's an official term, but that's kind of how they've labeled Shooting Insight, it is essentially where you have a combination of the typical Space Invaders, ship flying up, shooting things that are coming down. You've also got it where the ship comes in from the side and it's shooting things from the side, and then you've got a top-down thing where you're able to move around, and also one where it's a little bit more of a first-person view, but more in the third-person perspective, if that makes sense, where things are flying towards you and you are shooting them. That is essentially what encapsulates the gameplay of Macross Shooting Insight, and if you do not care for any of that kind of stuff, you're not going to care for this game. However, if any of those three styles of gameplay that I just mentioned interest you in the slightest, then you'll probably have a good time with this one. Now, like I said, it doesn't break the mold of this style of game whatsoever, but if you are someone who enjoys that more simplistic, arcade, some could argue repetitive style of gameplay, then you'll have a fun time with this. I enjoy my classic arcade games, whether that be Space Invaders, Pac-Man. Tetris in particular is my all-time favourite arcade game and is one of my favourite games of all time. And those games, they have a very simple setup in terms of their gameplay, but that's what makes them so beloved and essentially makes them timeless, is that the repetitive nature of those games is appealing and it's fun to play and it's addictive in many ways. And that's kind of what Macross Shooting Insight delivers. It delivers a gameplay style where, like I said, I put about 15 or so hours into this game and I could easily put some more time into it. I don't need to. I've pretty much completed everything the game has to offer. But because the gameplay loop is so simple and satisfying and just nice to play, it makes it more replayable, even if you don't actually have anything else to complete in the game. From a visual and performance perspective, this game is also really solid. The visuals are not too crazy or anything like that, but they also don't need to be. They're fine as they are. And then performance-wise, I've noticed no crashes, I've noticed no low frame rate drops or anything like that. The only thing I'd say, and I don't know whether this is necessarily a performance thing, but I feel like the kind of barrel rolling with the ships is a little bit slow. I would kind of like it where it's a little bit more fluid and fast paced, where you could, kind of barrel roll, not quite across the screen, but a lot further than you already do. And there's almost a little bit of a stopping time between ending the barrel roll or evade, whatever you want to call it, and then actually getting to start shooting again. I wish that the flow between those two things was a little bit better, but that's a very minor complaint in terms of the gameplay, and it's not necessarily a problem with the performance of it. It's just, I guess, a decision in terms of the gameplay. I think if you are a big fan of the Macross franchise, though, a lot of the appeal of this game is going to come from this crossover element, where all these characters and all these different series of Macross are essentially all pulled into one time period, which I believe is set during Macross 7 or something, and you're pulling from Macross Plus, Macross Frontier, Delta, and then of course 7 as well, which takes place within that time period. Also Macross 0 as well, I forgot to mention that one. But you're essentially pulling all of that together, and you get to see how those different personalities would interact with one another. Now, in terms of my Macross viewing knowledge, I've barely seen anything. I've seen Macross Plus. So the only character or characters I was kind of familiar with in this were the ones from Macross Plus, so Isamu, Guild, Myung, Sharon Apple System, all that kind of stuff. I was familiar with that kind of thing, but everything else I was fairly unfamiliar with. But I'm very interested to watch some of these series, and one of the things I like about it is that it doesn't spoil too much of those series. I don't feel like I have been spoiled or anything like that on a lot of the ongoings of the story. It manages to keep a lot of that under wraps, but it gives you a good idea of character personalities and the different interactions between those characters of those respective series. And when it comes to Macross as a series, there are two major elements that essentially make it up. You've got the piloting stuff and the action, and then of course you've got like the idle type music, the songstresses as they are called, and that kind of stuff also delivers in this game, because you do have a lot of songs from those various Macross series implemented into this, and they essentially play like within the boss fight or like kind of the end of the second act of each stage. For those that don't know how the stages play out, you essentially have like three parts to it, where you have, one part that might be, for example, your typical Space Invader type flying up thing, and then you've got the one where you're transformed into your robot mode, and it's kind of the top down thing, and then you'll have a boss fight. So that's kind of how the stages tend to play out, and it'd usually be like the last like half of that second part, and then the boss fight where you'd have the song from one of the songstresses play, and it kind of gives you a little bit of a boost in terms of attack or speed or anything like that, and you just get a cool song playing in a boss fight, which is always fun to have. Now, one of the problems I guess I have with the way they implement the songs in is that they kind of put this sparkly border around the screen, which can be very distracting when you are really trying to avoid laser shots and that. When you're not hyper concentrated on avoiding every single shot and not getting hit in order to get various trophies, then those songs are awesome, and they really like kind of amp up the boss fight experience. I've got one major frustration with those songs though, and I gotta be honest, even though I do have issues that kind of taint the game a little bit more, this is the one that actually irritates me the most, and it is the lack of information high in this game. I don't know why they didn't include it, because it's probably the best song from Macross Plus, also probably the most iconic, the one that everyone would probably want in, and also fits the most in terms of hyping up boss fights, and would have been perfect as the song to use in the final boss fight, but they don't have it in the game. I can't think that it's a rights issue, because all those songs are made for the film, and if they got access to one, which they do, I think it's Wanna Be an Angel, which, fits in terms of how it's implemented into this game, but I just don't get why Information High isn't there. It makes the most sense, it would work the best for the final battle, and I don't know why they didn't include it. My only guess is that it's a very long song, but there's a large amount of that that's quite instrumental, so you could kind of just take a part of it and cut it down to like 3 minutes or something and use it. I don't know. Like, it's a question that I constantly ask myself playing this game. Where is Information High? Why have they not included it? Because it would have fit so well into certain parts of the story. Now moving on to my actual negatives with the game, and the first one is that I wish some of the other modes helped to differentiate themselves from what the story mode offers. And what I mean by that is, you have the story mode where you essentially play through 10 different stages, called areas within this game, and then you have some other game modes around that, like an arcade mode, an area survey, and then a boss rush. And you've also got it where you're fighting against like iconic Macross rivals. That is kind of separate and feels quite different. Like, that's the only game mode where it actually offers something different from what the story mode does. And what the other modes do is essentially take elements of the story mode and repackage them, but not really. The arcade mode, for example, you can play through these different areas and you're essentially playing through them without cutscenes. But it plays out in the same way. You can actually play through the story mode without cutscenes anyway, so the arcade mode just seems incredibly pointless and doesn't offer anything new. The area survey, same thing again. You can go through and do these different stages, and as it says, an area survey, so you're essentially playing through these areas. But again, it's the same thing as what the story mode offers and what arcade mode offers. And then you've got the boss rush thing, which, as you would expect, you're essentially just fighting through the boss fights, one after another, which is fine. But they kind of just do it in a way where it's like, you play through this boss fight, loading screen, next boss fight, and it's just not done in a very creative or different way to kind of set itself apart. So you've essentially got 3 modes in here, which are taking elements of one mode, repackaging them slightly, and thus you just don't have a whole lot of different content. I have thought it over in my head just a little bit of how you could make this game like incredibly replayable, and that is doing a game mode where it's like a procedurally generated type thing, and it just kind of plays out like a bit of a roguelike kind of situation, except not with the kind of permadeath type thing going on. So, you'd be playing through an area and it wouldn't exactly play out the same each time. Like I said, procedurally generated in a way, and this is one of those games where it would lend itself very easily to that. So when you're playing through, for example, Area C, it's not going to play out in the exact same way every single time. Now obviously Area B plays a little bit different to Area C, but if you were to play through Area C 3 or 4 times, it'll play out the same way every time. So like if you wanted to kind of get a good idea of when the enemy's coming and all that kind of stuff to really amp up the experience, where you know exactly when this enemy is going to come in, this one, and where they're going to come from, you can do that. And there's, I guess, a certain appeal to that in terms of mastering the game, if you will. But I guess if you want like a different experience from each level that you play in every single time you play it, this game doesn't offer that. You can essentially predict what's going to happen based on how many times you've played it and how much of an idea you've got for how the game's going to play out. And like I said, for some people there's a certain appeal to that. For me personally, I did find there's a little bit of appeal to that as well. But I would also like a mode where it is procedurally generated and almost infinitely replayable, to the point that you don't know what you're going to get each time. That would have been a very simple game mode to add to this. I don't think in terms of coding it would have been overly complex, and it would have amped up the replayability like 100 times. It would have been that simple an improvement that would have added so much more to this game. And going back to the initial question of, is this game worth playing, that's where another negative comes in that I don't think this is worth the price. They charge $34.99 for this game, and I simply do not think it is worth that amount of money. If it was $15, maybe £20, sure, I would probably say go out and buy it, because that's not a whole lot of money, and like I think you get enough content out of this and enough quality out of it, if you will. For example, there's a game that released recently called Rogue Flight that is $15.99. I haven't actually got the game myself, but I did play it when I went to MCM Comic Con in October last year. Really liked the gameplay of that, and like I said, it's $15.99. It's a similar type of game and very inspired by Macross, and I would probably say it is the better Macross game. Even though it's not Macross, it kind of gives that same experience, and like I said, it's more than half the price of this. So overall, is Macross Shooting Insight worth buying? I would say at the price of $34.99, no. That is simply too expensive for this type of game. The amount of gameplay you're going to get out of it, the amount of differentiation in terms of gameplay you're going to get out of it, is not worth £35. However, once it does drop down in price to say £15, $20, even £25, then I would say, yeah, definitely go out and buy this game. If you like this style of gameplay, the multi-dimensional shooter as they call it, you're going to like this game. It doesn't do anything like super unique or, you know, it doesn't change up the genre or anything like that, but if you like this style of gameplay, you're going to get a good experience out of it. It is a fun time. If you're a Macross fan, it's going to kind of deliver the appeal of bringing all these characters, all these different pilots, all these different series together and kind of crafting a story out of that. Now, the story is not the most amazing thing ever, but it's an excuse to bring all these characters together, bring all these different villains together, and thus you just have something that celebrates the entire Macross franchise. Outside of the original series, I don't know why they still tend to ignore that in terms of Macross stuff, but they do. And in this game, it's like the only Macross series that is completely missing from it. So with all that in mind, I'm going to give Macross Shooting Insight a B. Before I get out of here though, please do leave a like on this video and subscribe if you are a fan of mecha anime content and want to see plenty more videos like this in the future. And like I said earlier, head on down to the comment section below, let me know your thoughts on this game if you've played it, or after watching this review, are you going to go out and buy it, are you going to wait for a sale to come on? Just let me know all that down in the comment section below. Thank you once again for tuning into Mecha Chat today, and I'll see you guys next time.